I'm Joe Condon. Welcome to our program. This week our guest is Congressman Chris Gibson of the 19th Congressional District of New York State. You represent 17% of New York State with 11 counties. That's a lot of geography.
It's a beautiful place. I love it. I've got the Hudson Valley, the Catskill Mountain region, part of the Capital region, and parts of central New York.
Now, the area that you're talking about is one of the biggest in the area for Lyme disease. In fact, one of the worst areas in the United States of America. You've been doing a lot of things in Congress to remedy this problem and address Lyme disease. Want to talk about that?
Well, it's a public health scourge. I'll tell you, Joe, when I got home from the Army in 2010, it seemed like not a day that didn't go by that I didn't have somebody come up, grab my arm, and tell me about either their own personal suffering or a close family member or friend that was suffering from Lyme disease. And so, our office, we've got very focused on this, and we've brought forward legislation over the years to help move us towards cures and solutions. But, actually the most promising piece of legislation we had passed in part of a bigger bill this year, H.R. 6, 21st Century Cures. This is, I think, very good news for the American people. If you're suffering from cancer or Alzheimer's or heart disease, or perhaps on the spectrum, and now suffering from chronic Lyme disease, this bill is helping address those maladies. And I think it's going to not only bring forward cures and solutions, it's also good for the economy, because we're actually addressing and making stronger this sector of the economy, the researchers that are involved with this. And we put it together in such a way that it actually reduces the deficit. I'd like to say a little bit more about all this. First of all, strong support for the bill. H.R. 6 passed on the floor of the House, 344 to 77. The President of the United States has issued a statement of support for 21st Century Cures, and now we're working with the Senate. And, it does basically three things. The first is it includes up to nearly $9 billion of new federal money for medical research. So important. And the second thing it does is it reorganizes the way we share information. Think of all those researchers out there doing yeoman's work, incredible, groundbreaking work, may not be situationally aware on what other researchers are doing. Well, if you think about it, a lot of the regulatory state came into existence in the mid and late 20th century, before the information age. So what we're doing in the bill is we're taking advantage of information technologies, more use of the cloud, portals, and we're bringing clinical trials closer to patients. So that's the second thing, the money, the way we share information. And the third is we reform the way we bring curative drugs and medical devices to market. It shouldn't take 12 years to bring a curative drug to market, and this is really important. So in all of this, we were able to get word for word our bill that really changes the way the federal government deals with Lyme disease, incorporated into this. And what it does is, first of all, requires the federal government to have a strategy and a plan to address those with chronic Lyme, those with tick-borne diseases. And then, importantly, the second thing it does is it forms a working group of federal and non-federal partners, because this has really been, in my view, the proximate cause of the problem, is because we're not addressing properly the guidelines that come out of the Centers for Disease Control. It's too narrow. It doesn't even recognize chronic Lyme. And when I press the CDC and I say, how come you're not listening? How come you're not making action on this? They say, well, if the science was there, we'd change it. Well, part of the problem we're dealing with is our experts that are in this field, they're having a hard time getting their research published. So by forming this working group of federal and non-federal partners and putting the light of day on this subject, we believe that ultimately it's going to change the guidelines. It's going to bring forward better treatment protocols and insurance company coverage. Because when I've pressed the insurance companies and I say, how come you're not paying for more of this? They say, well, if it was approved care, well, we pay for more of it. Now you're back to the guidelines, why this bill is so important. It requires the plan, it requires diverse scientific viewpoints, and we have our experts with a seat at the table so that we can overcome these obstacles that are in our way.
You were talking about getting drugs approved for use in the United States of America. Lots of times we hear about people leaving this country and going to other countries to get prescriptions that are not yet legal in the United States, and you're working on that, not only with Lyme disease.
Well, Joe, you're exactly right, and that has been exacerbated in the last decade decade, we're falling behind because of the overly bureaucratic way that we have clinical trials and the approval process. A lot of these jobs are moving overseas, and therefore a lot of the cures are in Europe and even in some cases in Canada. So, what we've done in a bipartisan way, I mentioned the vote, 344 to 77, in a bipartisan way, we think, got this trade-off between speed and safety. We think we've got it in a better place, because clearly we want to make sure that what we put out there is safe. And at the same time, we need to do it in the most expeditious manner so that we can have the maximum amount of cures.
Now, you were telling us that recently you met with the Pope during his recent visit to the United States of America, and he issued an encyclical on the environment, and you've introduced a resolution in Congress for improved environmental stewardship. You and the Pope are sort of in sync. Well,
let me say two things on that. First of all, as a Catholic, very inspiring. Look, I think that the Pope has really put a focus back on love. And so I really see the Pope transcending politics, actually, in that in a very restless age, and some would say a graceless age, or certainly one in needing more of collaborative approaches, you see the Pope putting a focus on love and on serving others. And he leads by example. So to me, I find it very inspiring. And, with regard to the environment, look, I have long said, if conservation isn't conservative, then words have no meaning at all. I lament the fact that this has become a partisan issue. It's not a partisan issue. It's an American issue. Quite frankly, it's actually a human issue. When you take a look at what our experiences have been in upstate New York, we dealt with Hurricanes Irene, Lee, and Sandy, 3 500-year floods, all within 3.5 years.
We're still cleaning up.
Well, we've made a lot of progress on that, but either one believes that we had a 1 in over 100 million chance, or you believe, as I do, that we have a new normal, that we're dealing with changing climate. And it's not just the frequency of these storms and how violent and devastating they've been to us, but it's also rising sea levels, which has major complications. We see an increase in invasive species in my district, which is problematical across the full spectrum, but also for our agricultural sector, which is the #1 driver for our economy. So look, I believe that we can come together, we can make a difference on this, and we can do it in a manner that's pro-growth, that creates jobs. We don't have to have bad tax policy, which I oppose, to make a difference. I mean, if you think about it, in some ways it makes sense that a former soldier would be using this construct. That, if you think about the challenge of the Cold War, how we united our country in very much a bipartisan way, we rose to the challenge of the communist threat. And we did it largely through research, development, and prototyping that allowed us to overcome the Soviet Union with technologies. And what did we get as a byproduct? Well, we got the supercomputer, and we got the internet. We got the information age. It transformed the way we lived. What I maintain is that if we use a similar approach of investing, making public-private investments in research, development, and prototyping, we're going to transform the energy market and democratize energy, the way we produce, convey, and consume energy. I'll give you several examples. First of all, photovoltaics, solar power. We have a very exciting program right now called the Sunshot Program, the goal of which is to drive the total cost of solar power down to 9 cents per kilowatt hour. That's very ambitious given where we are today, but I'm bullish on it because we're using some of the same approaches and indeed some of the same engineers who brought us the iPhone and the iPad, that semiconductor. And by the way, made in America, those semiconductors, something we're very proud of, actually made in upstate New York. But if we use these approaches of nanotechnology, coatings, and composites, and substitute materials for the gold and silver now required for photovoltaics, you're going to drive down the total cost. Can you imagine a working class family that reshingles their home every 20 to 25 years that has the opportunity to actually get receptacles with this so that they're actually functionally replacing their roof at the same time that they're cutting their energy bill in half? Think about what that will do to that family, their choices and freedoms. Think about what that does to local economy. We do all of that while we're helping conserve the environment. So I am passionate about this issue like so many others. What inclines me towards safeguarding the earth and conserving the environment is the same inclination that works to get back to a balanced budget. We want to make sure that future generations Mary Jo and I, our kids, and hopefully their kids, that they will be in a situation where they get the same choices and freedoms that we have had. And I think to do that, you need to have fiscal conservatism to get back to a balanced budget, but you also need to conserve the environment. You need to conserve the earth so that they also get to enjoy an incredible living.
You were talking about solar energy. You had also indicated in the past that you were interested in having a nuclear power plant in the capital region. Governor Cuomo wants to close Indian Point. Are you still interested in doing that?
Well, I looked into it at great detail. I don't think that it's feasible after much examination, mainly because of the way we convey energy, too. It just wouldn't be possible. But still, I believe that we should follow science. So, with we have 6 reactors now in New York, and candidly, a third of our energy comes from nuclear power plants. In fact, lights you got here in this, if you think about it, every 3 seconds, your energy is powered by nuclear power. So look, if a plant becomes into the red zone where they're having concerns about safety, absolutely there should be maintenance or even take it offline. But while it's safe, we have to think about reliability of our energy, safety first, reliability, and then cost. The fact of the matter is, the nuclear power plants, they represent about 14% of the bids. You know how this works in New York, it's competitive. About 14% of the bids, but almost a third of the energy. Why? Because it's cheaper. And because it's clean and reliable. So, I'm not ideological on this issue. Those that want to take offline these power plants without having a plan to replace it, it's not good for the people in New York. You think of our working class people. I grew up in one of these families. The cost of energy really impacts a working class family and our small businesses. We need to strike a balance. We need to have absolutely safety first, but then we need to be cost conscious of our families and of our small businesses. So, but let me also tell you about biomass. Up at Fort Drum, another example of renewable energy. Right. So at Fort Drum, we had a power plant that was powered by coal. It was coal-fired power plant, and it shut down. And then within a year, it came back up, Joe, as a biomass power plant. It's thriving. So, here you have renewable energy that is powering our servicemen and women and their families, providing local jobs, and it's good for the environment. I think biomass has got tremendous potential here in New York State. I think about the Southern Tier and other places. This can be a significant game changer to job creation throughout upstate New York and revitalize the once Empire State. I'm bullish on this too.